enter and disrupt our all too familiar and homely furniture of conceptions, prejudices, and judgments. Understood thus, the question of imagination is both moral and normative, as well as communicational and ultimately ontological. This would be the case only if you accept my invitation at the end of this monologue that we fall freely towards reality, towards objects, vicarious forms of communication, and all the wreckage left by crisis upon crisis. I shall not waste time defining labels, colonial, post, deep, or whatever. For now, it will suffice to point out that for me the condition of possibility of taking a decolonial turn is to recognize the vertical drama of unevenness as constitutive of the public sphere of communication, especially in its global phase. This goes together with the need to take a stock of the analytical importance of this concept, unevenness, neglected in spite of its venerable academic and militant history. From political economy, independency sociology, boom literature and world systems historical analysis to third cinema, Foucauldian genealogy and schizoanalysis, particularly the work that both Foucault and Guattari did here in Brazil, and from early cybernetics, social medicine, and the biology of self-organized systems to contemporary cognitive science and computer networking, as well as visual art. As I show in my book, both Brazil and Chile were, throughout the 1970s and thereafter, crucial sites of this hitherto ignored story. It is to this disavowed history, which I hope to redeem in my book, that I now wish to go back in order to rework the idea of common or general will, the ignored history of the Chilean revolutionary and Brazilian contributions to the software of unevenness, which was provided with a hardware thanks to the pioneering efforts of a group of scientists, artists, and militants in Allende's Chile. If you prefer a less academic formulation, but for that you're going to have to buy the book. This is the story of how the internet, another internet, was invented in Chile in the 1970s. The contribution my book wishes to make to political and legal theory, as well as to the writing of history, hinges upon what political theorist Jane Anna Gordon calls disavowal. This is a term borrowed by her and others from psychoanalytic and cognitive approaches. Disavowal involves embracing two contradictory beliefs in response to traumatic events. Talk of disavowal takes stock of the fact that most attempts to repudiate memory after trauma or catastrophe result not in silence, but leave residual marks or traces of evasion. These often take the form of boundaries or fault lines, limiting or displacing the appearance of less desirable subjects and objects, to keep them beneath the terrain of politics from participation in discursive practices in their own right, and from existence itself. To complement the point made by the disavowal school, it is necessary to realize that this entails also the recognition that something which exists might turn out to be unrecognizable when you next observe it. This brings us back to reality. This is to say that subjects and objects displaced to the brink of inexistence, disavowed, remain spoken for in the very effort to disavow them. The gesture that Peter was conceptualizing yesterday. An example of this is when Hegel, or Republican and left-leaning theorists and historians of freedom, or those rationalizing its compromise, theorize liberty in the absence of terms like plantation, slaveholder, or liberation. Another is the observation made by sociologist Manuel Castells that we often miss the fact that there are third and fourth worlds in every first, as well as first worlds in the most deprived of places. The lesson for us, political and legal theorists, for historians and storytellers, returning to the language of meeting cultures, is that we must restrain ourselves from masking the conflicts within cultures or legal and political systems that we should seek to amplify. According to Gordon, this is akin to embracing a general will against the will of all. Not simply to aggregate approaches or interests, but to reenact the world and political concerns that these differences have in common. This is also the matter of the unity of orientation invoked by Salvador Allende in his burning palace on the 11th of September 1973 as he fought an entire army alone. His solitude was not physical, but an index of the obliteration and fragmentation that would follow the unleashing of the furies and of man's inhumanity to man. Moreover, his example and words, which went on to acquire the character of fragmented debris, poor images, and words circulating as ghostly electromagnetic substances in the web, became an instance of the creative convergence of different elements incorporated within what can be called, following his own terms, a unity of orientation and an intensity of interaction. That is to say, not just an occasion for the casual sharing of social and political worlds, leftist, anarchist, feminist, indigenista, Afro-Latin American, democratic, LGTB, libertarian, and so on, but, moreover, for the mutual constitution and self-constitution of new landscapes of meaning and options. Such is the significance of the reworked concept of general will that I take from contemporary political theorists like Gordon. Unlike the models of multiculturalism that predominate nowadays, what is stressed when we speak of general will, or the will of the people, is ongoing proximity. Examples of such phenomenon, which Gordon terms creolization, are the languages spoken in the Caribbean, Patois, but also the practices of popular religiosity widespread in Brazil and the rest of Latin America, from Voodoo and Santeria to Candomblé, Macumba or Kimbanda, and from Freemasonry or liberation theology to the Pombagira cult, frequently dismissed as heresy or fetisharia. As is well known, in Brazil and elsewhere in the Americas, African-derived spiritual traditions were a perennial source of concern for slave owners, civil authorities, lawyers, criminologists, and chroniclers of city life, since enslaved Africans were first brought to former Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, and French colonies, and indigenous peoples brought to the brink of extinction. In the late 19th and throughout the 20th century, elites clothed or reinscribed the racial and class concerns in the language of hygiene, criminality, law and order, and paternalistic nationalism. In contrast, those opposed to such reinscription and cloaking, like the poet Pablo Neruda, Afro-Chilean activist Carmen Lazo, or Salvador Allende in early 20th century Chile, embraced creolized forms of religiosity, popular imagery, and politics. In Allende's case, the imagery of radical enlightenment and Freemasonry that was the key to the struggle for liberation and independence in the Caribbean and Latin America. But also music, dance, and poetry, which were crucial to the living experience of these avowed people. These informed Allende's lifelong engagement with the field of social medicine and biosocial understandings of medical phenomena, which he helped pioneer. For him, as well as others, the biosocial approach to medical phenomena gained importance as scientific inquiry became increasingly desocialized, tending to ask only biological questions about what were in fact biosocial and political phenomena. Such a tendency allowed for the reinscription and cloaking of social concerns about race, gender, and class in physical or scientific terms. Put otherwise, by turning to creolized approaches and disavowed knowledges, Allende and others responded critically to what they saw as the increasing intertwinement between truth and juridical forms, understood precisely in the sense popularized by Michel Foucault during his Brazilian lectures in 1973. This term would define their politics as well as their revolutionary approaches to law, also favoring their opening towards the emerging discourses behind new network and visual media. It is in this very precise sense that I call the Chilean way the first revolution against what we now term, following Foucault, biopolitics. The Chilean Revolution was the first biopolitical revolution. More recently, the dominant language for such reinscription has been the discourses of economic science, development, and legality. This is no coincidence. From the outset, a dimension of futurehood and calculability has been inherent to the narrative of modern law, philosophy, politics, and commerce, according to which the metropolitan, cosmopolitan rule of law and natural rights entails a specific temporal and a spatial standpoint, which makes both time and space a matter of chance and predictability. Such narrative and standpoint, I argue, either portray a stable ground or create a supposition that it exists in the first place. The visual verticality inherent to the narrative of modern law, art, and philosophy establishes a visual normality and thereafter a normativity. Such narrative presents itself as the reasoned description of all that is visible on the surface of the earth. A space which is the object of scientific or physical geography and the ground of law is presented to reason by means of visual perception. But this perception is no simple empirical phenomenon. It is the result of an optical illusion. That illusion is linear perspective. Hence the need for a brief history of the horizon in preparation for our thought and visual experiment on freefall.